Marcus Whitmore adjusted the cuff of his Italian silk shirt while observing the restaurant's movement through the windows of his Bentley. "Before we begin, tell me something about where you live. What's the weather like today?" The modest establishment contrasted dramatically with the places he usually frequented, but it was exactly this simplicity that had drawn him there. At 42 years old, the real estate magnate had built an empire spanning 3 continents. But lately, he felt a growing emptiness that even million-dollar deals couldn't fill. His father's recent death had left more than just a financial legacy. It had left unanswered questions about the true nature of the people around him. On that rainy October afternoon, Marcus had decided to do something he had never done before: eat at an ordinary place, dressed like an ordinary person, to observe how he would be treated without the weight of his fortune and influence. He had chosen simple clothes from an unknown brand, driven a basic rental car, and left all status symbols at home. Except for one detail he had forgotten: the family ring he rarely removed from his finger. A century-old piece with the Whitmore coat of arms engraved in antique gold. The interior of Corner of Hope restaurant exuded human warmth. The worn wooden tables told stories of countless shared meals, and the aroma of home cooking hung in the air like a familiar embrace. Marcus chose a corner table from where he could discreetly observe the movement. Soon he was approached by a young waitress with brown hair pulled back in a simple bun, whose green eyes radiated a genuine kindness that surprised him. "Good afternoon. I'm Eleanor. Welcome to our little corner," she said with a smile that seemed to illuminate the entire environment. Her hands, Marcus noticed, were small and calloused from work, but moved with natural grace as she organized the utensils on the table. "It's the first time I've seen you here. What can I offer to make your day better?" The simplicity and sincerity of the question touched something deep in Marcus. It had been years since anyone had genuinely asked about his well-being without ulterior motives. "Just a good and honest meal," he replied, discreetly studying the young woman's face. Eleanor appeared to be about 25 years old, and there was something in her gestures that suggested maturity beyond her age. Marcus Whitmore had not been born into the wealth he now possessed. Son of a small merchant, he had grown up in a working-class neighborhood where every penny was counted twice before being spent. His father, William Whitmore, had been a man of rigid principles who believed that a person's character was measured not by what they possessed, but by how they treated those who had nothing to offer in return. "Wealth without compassion is just empty accumulation," his father used to say, words that echoed in Marcus's mind with increasing intensity in recent months. Marcus's rise to the top of the business world had been meteoric and relentless. At 28, he had already closed his first million-dollar deal. At 35, his company controlled one of the largest real estate portfolios in the country. But success had come with a price that only recently he had begun to understand: growing isolation and an inability to distinguish between genuine and self-interested relationships. In recent years, Marcus had become increasingly skeptical about the people around him: employees who bowed in exaggerated reverence, business partners who smiled broadly while calculating their own benefits, women who were more interested in his wallet than his personality. The world had become a place of masks and hidden interests, where authenticity seemed to have become a rare and precious commodity. William Whitmore's death 3 months earlier had amplified these questions. During the funeral, Marcus had observed hundreds of people paying condolences, but realized that many were more interested in making contacts than genuinely mourning the loss. This realization had planted a seed of doubt that grew day after day. In a world where his money spoke louder than his humanity, were there still people capable of seeing beyond wealth? Eleanor returned with a steaming plate of homemade stroganoff and rice that smelled like the meals of Marcus's childhood. "I hope you like it," she said, carefully placing the plate before him. Donna Margarete has been making this dish for over 20 years. She says the secret recipe is cooking with love. There was a poetic simplicity in the way she spoke, without affectation or pretension. While eating, Marcus observed Elena interacting with other customers. She greeted regular customers by name, asked about their families, offered an extra glass of water even before they asked. With an elderly man who clearly had financial difficulties, she discreetly served an extra portion of side dish without charging. Marcus was intrigued by this natural generosity in someone who, from her simple uniform and worn shoes, obviously didn't have much to give. During the meal, fragments of Eleanor's life reached him through casual conversations with other employees. She worked 2 jobs to support her sick mother and still managed to study nursing in an evening course. She had grown up in the same humble neighborhood where the restaurant was located and was known for helping neighbors in difficulties whenever possible. Marcus began to realize he was observing something rare, a genuinely good person in their purest form. The afternoon progressed, and Marcus found himself deliberately prolonging his presence at the restaurant. He ordered coffee, then dessert, finding excuses to continue observing Eleanor. There was something hypnotic about her authenticity. She treated each person as if they were the most important in the world, regardless of their appearance or apparent social status. This contrasted dramatically with Marcus's world, where the treatment he received was directly related to his bank account value. When Elena approached to remove the plates, Marcus noticed she wore a simple ring on her right hand, an obviously old and worn piece, but one she occasionally touched with affection, as if it were a precious talisman. There was something familiar about that gesture, a vague memory he couldn't locate precisely. "Does that ring have any special story?" asked Marcus, curious for the first time in years about another person's personal life without any ulterior intention. Elena looked at her own finger and smiled with gentle melancholy. "It was my grandmother's. She always said it was a very old family piece, but we never managed to discover much about its origin. My mother said it belonged to several generations of women in our family." She paused, looking at the ring with affection. "I know it's not worth much in money, but to me it's worth everything. It's all I have left of her." Marcus felt a strange pang in his chest. There was something deeply touching about the way Elena valued that small object, not for its material value, but for its emotional significance. It was a concept he had forgotten in his world, where everything was measured in figures and return on investment. That night, returning to his empty mansion, Marcus couldn't get Elena out of his thoughts. There was something about her that challenged all his perceptions about human motivation. She had treated an apparently resourceless stranger with the same kindness she showed to regular customers, without expecting anything in return. Was it possible that there were still such people in the world, people who acted with genuine kindness simply because it was the right thing to do? During the following weeks, Marcus became a regular customer at Corner of Hope, always keeping his real identity secret. Each visit confirmed his initial observations. Elena was consistently kind, hard-working, and genuinely concerned with others' well-being. She remembered small details about her customers, asked about their lives, offered words of encouragement on difficult days. Marcus began to subtly test Elena's character in small and discreet ways. He left a modest tip in the first week and observed that she showed no change in behavior. He pretended to have forgotten his wallet on one occasion, and Elena immediately offered to pay for his meal from her own pocket, insisting he could reciprocate when convenient. He told an invented story about financial difficulties and saw in her eyes genuine compassion, not condescending pity. Each test only reinforced the same conclusion. Elena was a genuinely good person, motivated by intrinsic kindness that didn't depend on external rewards. It was like discovering a rare endangered species, something Marcus had begun to believe no longer existed in the modern world. It was during his 7th visit that everything changed. It was a particularly busy afternoon, and Eleanor was visibly exhausted after working a double shift. Marcus had noticed she was juggling more tables than usual, probably covering for some absent colleague. Despite the evident fatigue, she maintained the same warm smile and careful attention for each customer. When Elena approached his table to serve coffee, Marcus noticed her hands were trembling slightly from fatigue. She was in the middle of the movement when the ring slipped from her sweaty finger and fell to the floor with a metallic sound that echoed like an alarm bell in Marcus's world. Instinctively, both bent down to retrieve the ring. Elena got there first, but when their hands briefly met as she picked up the jewelry, Marcus could clearly see, for the first time, the details engraved on the surface of the antique metal. The world stopped. Engraved in the worn gold was the Whitmore coat of arms, the same emblem that Marcus carried on his own finger, the same symbol that had adorned his family's belongings for more than 200 years. The heraldic eagle with open wings, the laurel crown, the intertwined lilies, every detail was identical to the ring that had been passed from father to son in his lineage for generations. Marcus remained completely motionless, his mind trying to process the impossibility of what he was seeing. How could a humble waitress in a simple restaurant be wearing a ring with his family's coat of arms? A ring that, according to all the information he possessed, should be unique, an exclusive piece created specifically for the direct heirs of the Whitmore lineage. "Sorry," said Elena, clearly embarrassed for having dropped the ring. "It's been a little loose lately. I need to have it adjusted, but—" She stopped, noticing the frozen expression on Marcus's face. "Are you all right? You look like you've seen a ghost." Marcus struggled to regain composure. His mind was racing, trying to find logical explanations for what he had witnessed. Could it be an extraordinary coincidence? A skillful forgery? Or was there something much deeper happening there? Something that could change not only his understanding about Elena, but about his own family history? "The ring," he managed to say finally, his voice coming out hoarser than intended. "Where did you say you got that ring?" Eleanor looked at him with growing curiosity. "As I mentioned before, it was my grandmother's, family, for generations. Why do you ask? Is there something strange about it?" Marcus stared at the small object in Eleanor's hand, then at his own almost identical ring. The implications began to form in his mind like pieces of a complex puzzle. If Elena's ring was genuine, and every instinct told him it was, then there was a connection between them much deeper than any character test he had imagined. "May I ask your grandmother's full name?" questioned Marcus, trying to keep his voice steady. "Isabella Whitmore," Elena replied without hesitation. "She died when I was very small, but my mother always spoke about her with great affection. She said she was a very elegant woman, but that she had lost contact with part of the family because of some old disagreement." The surname hit Marcus like lightning. Whitmore, the same surname he carried, the same lineage that had built his fortune. But how was this possible? He knew his family's genealogical tree in detail. He had studied every branch, every connection, especially after inheriting control of the family business. Or at least, he thought he knew it. "Isabella Whitmore," Marcus repeated slowly, as if the words were a magic formula that could unravel decades of mystery. "Would you happen to know when she was born, or any other information about her?" Eleanor frowned, clearly intrigued by Marcus's sudden interest in her family history. "Well, she was born around 1920, if I'm not mistaken. My mother has some old photos of her. Why are you so interested? Did you know someone with that name?" Marcus felt his world reorganizing around this new information. Isabella Whitmore, born in 1920. This name and date corresponded to something that had been deliberately erased from his family's official history. a story his father had mentioned only once in a moment of particular melancholy before quickly changing the subject. For years, Marcus had wondered about certain inconsistencies in the family genealogy, records that seemed incomplete, photographs where people had been cut out, casual mentions of relatives that were never developed in conversations. His father had been particularly evasive about certain areas of family history, especially events that had occurred in the 1940s. Now, looking at Elena, really looking at her for the first time beyond his character assessment, Marcus began to notice physical similarities he had ignored before. The delicate line of the jaw, the specific color of green eyes, the way she tilted her head slightly when thinking. Characteristics he had seen in old photographs of his own family. "Elena," said Marcus carefully, "do you have any photo of your grandmother? Something you could show me?" The young woman looked at him with an even more curious expression. "I have some at home, but may I ask why you're so interested in my family? Not that I mind, but it's a little unusual." Marcus realized he had reached a crucial point. He could continue pretending to be just a curious customer, or he could begin to reveal the truth about who he really was. The discovery of the ring had completely changed the nature of his presence there. This was no longer just a character test, but potentially the discovery of a family connection that had been lost for decades. "I believe," he said finally, "that perhaps we have much more in common than either of us imagined." Elena put the ring back on her finger, but her eyes remained fixed on Marcus. "What do you mean by that?" Before Marcus could answer, the restaurant owner's voice echoed from the kitchen. "Elena, dear, I need you back here for a minute." "Excuse me," said Eleanor, clearly reluctant to leave the conversation unfinished. "Can I come back in a few minutes?" Marcus nodded, his brain working frantically while Eleanor walked away. He needed more information before revealing his own identity. If his suspicions were correct, Elena wasn't just an extraordinarily kind waitress. She was his lost cousin, descendant of a branch of the family that had apparently been cut from the Whitmore official history. But why? What kind of disagreement could have been so severe as to completely erase a person from the family genealogy? And if Elena really was his relative, what did that mean for the entire character test he had been conducting? There was something deeply ironic in the possibility that the most genuinely good person he had found in years was, in fact, his own blood. That night, Marcus cancelled all his meetings and headed to his private office in his mansion, where he kept all the family's historical documents. There were entire chests of correspondence, photographs, certificates, and records he had inherited from his father. Some he had examined meticulously when taking control of the business. Others remained sealed, considered irrelevant to current commercial operations. It was time to open everything. He began with the family photograph albums, specifically those from the 1920s to 1950s. He leafed through pages of sepia-toned images, looking for faces that might correspond to Eleanor's description of her grandmother. It was in the third collection that he found what he was looking for. A photograph dated 1945 showed a group of young adults in formal attire, apparently at some kind of family celebration. In the right corner of the image, Marcus recognized his own grandfather when young, but it was the young woman beside him that made his heart race. A woman with penetrating green eyes and delicate features that were unmistakably similar to Elena's. On the back of the photograph, in elegant handwriting, was written, "Family Reunion, William, Isabella, Margaret and Robert, May 1945. Isabella, there she was, Elena's grandmother, clearly part of the Whitmore family, photographed at an official family gathering. But if she was part of the family, why were Elena and her mother living in financial difficulties? Why didn't they have knowledge of their connection to one of the country's wealthiest families? Marcus continued investigating, now with renewed urgency. In a box of old correspondence, he found letters that began to reveal the story that had been buried for decades. Letters dated 1946 and 1947 spoke about the situation with Isabella and the need to take drastic measures to protect the family reputation. Gradually, the story unraveled through fragments of correspondence and legal documents. Isabella Whitmore had fallen in love with a man the family considered unsuitable, not for lack of character, but for his social class. Against the family's wishes, she had married him in 1946. The family's response had been swift and brutal. Isabella was completely disinherited, her name removed from official records, and all communication with her was cut off. The letters revealed that the family had gone even further, using their influence to make life difficult for the young couple in various cities. Isabella and her husband had been forced to move several times, always struggling to start over, while facing seemingly inexplicable obstacles in their attempts to establish a stable life. The last mention of Isabella in the family records was a note from 1952, informing that she had given birth to a daughter, presumably Eleanor's mother. The note was followed by a clear instruction. There should be no more mentions of this matter. The issue is closed. Marcus sat in his leather chair, feeling the full weight of the discovery. Elena wasn't just his cousin. She was the granddaughter of the woman who had been cruelly banished from the family for daring to marry for love. Her grandmother had been punished for choosing personal happiness over the family's social expectations, and subsequent generations had paid the price for this draconian decision. Now he understood why Elena worked 2 jobs to support her family, why she lived modestly despite carrying the ring of a millionaire family. She and her mother didn't even know they had a right to a substantial inheritance. They had been kept in ignorance of their own lineage as part of the continuing punishment for a decision made decades before they were born. The irony of the situation was not lost on Marcus. He had spent weeks testing Elena's character, looking for someone genuinely good in a world he perceived as corrupt and self-interested. Not only had he found such a person, but he discovered she was his own family, and his family had been systematically deprived of resources that could have made their lives much easier. Even more revealing was the fact that, despite generations of financial struggle and hardships that could have made any person bitter, Elena had maintained a kindness and generosity that put to shame many people who were born into wealth. She was living proof that character was not related to financial circumstances. It was something much deeper and purer. Marcus spent the entire night reading, discovering layer after layer of injustice that had been perpetrated against Isabella's branch of the family. The more he read, the more ashamed he became not only of his ancestors' actions, but of his own assumptions about human nature. He had been looking for genuine goodness, as if it were a rare curiosity, when it had been flourishing all along in his own family, a family that had been deliberately cut off and forgotten. When the sun rose, Marcus had already made a decision. He would reveal his identity to Elena, but not just as Marcus Whitmore, the real estate magnate. He would reveal himself as her cousin, as someone who had discovered a historical injustice that could finally be corrected. And he would do it in the most careful way possible, because Elena deserved to know the truth about her inheritance. Not just material, but the knowledge that she came from a lineage of people who, at their best, valued character above social conventions. But first, he needed to understand exactly what had been Isabella's fate after being banished from the family. There were more records to examine, more truths to discover. If he was going to fix the errors of the past, he needed to fully understand the extent of the damage caused. The next morning, Marcus returned to Corner of Hope with a mixture of nervousness and determination. Elena was there, as always, radiating the same warm hospitality, apparently with no idea that her life was about to change dramatically. "Good morning," she said with her characteristic smile. "You look tired today. Difficult night?" Marcus almost laughed at the simplicity of the observation. "You could say that," he replied. "Elena, about our conversation yesterday, about your grandmother. You mentioned your mother had photos of her." "Yes, I have some at home." "Still curious about that?" Elena tilted her head in that familiar way. "I can bring them tomorrow, if you want to see." "That would be very important to me," said Marcus. "But first I need to tell you something. Something that might change your understanding about your own family considerably." Elena stopped organizing the utensils on the table, clearly sensing the seriousness in Marcus's tone. "You're making me worried. Is it something bad?" "Not bad," said Marcus carefully. "Complex, very complex. Elena, I haven't been completely honest about who I am." At that moment, Donna Margarete emerged from the kitchen, interrupting the conversation. "Elena, dear, your mother called. She said she needs to go to the doctor this afternoon. You can leave early if necessary." Eleanor's expression immediately changed to concern. "She didn't mention not feeling well this morning." "Sorry," she said to Marcus. "My mother has some health issues. Can we continue our conversation another time?" Marcus saw the perfect opportunity. "Actually, I'd like to accompany you if you don't mind. We can talk on the way and, well, I'd very much like to meet your mother." Eleanor looked at him with surprise. "That's very kind, but I don't want to bother you. You don't even know us." "Elena," said Marcus softly, "I believe we know each other much better than you imagine." The public hospital where Elena's mother was being treated contrasted dramatically with the private medical establishments Marcus knew. The waiting rooms were crowded, the equipment seemed dated, and the clearly overworked staff did their best with limited resources. Marcus observed Elena navigating this environment with familiarity and patience, treating each staff member with the same respect she showed at the restaurant. "My mother is doing follow-up treatment for diabetes," Elena explained while they waited. "She worked her whole life as a cleaning lady, never had a decent health plan. Now that she's retired, we depend on the public system." She didn't say this with bitterness, just as a fact of life. "Sometimes it takes a little longer, but the doctors here are good. They do what they can." Marcus thought about his own medical experiences. Private doctors who attended him in luxurious offices, always available with a simple phone call. He had never considered what it would be like to navigate the healthcare system without resources or connections. Watching Elena gently advocate for her mother's interests with the staff, negotiating schedules and treatments, he gained a new perspective on the strength required just to maintain a dignified life without financial privileges. When they were finally called, Elena turned to Marcus. "You can wait here, or if you prefer to leave." "I'll wait," said Marcus firmly, "as long as necessary." While Elena was with her mother, Marcus observed the hospital's movement. He saw entire families waiting for news, people obviously saving to pay for medications, staff working double shifts. It was a world of real needs and limited resources, very different from his universe of luxuries and conveniences. He began to understand that the character test he had applied to Elena was, in fact, her daily life, dealing with real difficulties while maintaining compassion and generosity. 2 hours later, Elena emerged from the consultation area, accompanied by a woman of about 50, who walked slowly with the help of a cane. Maria Santos, she had taken her husband's name, had the same green eyes as Elena, but carried in her face the marks of a life of hard work and constant worries. "Mom," said Elena gently, "this is Marcus, a customer from the restaurant who kindly offered us a ride today." Maria looked at Marcus with the natural assessment of a mother protecting her daughter. "It's very kind of you to help people you don't even know," she said, with a voice that carried the wisdom of someone who had learned to be cautious about others' intentions. "Actually," said Marcus, "I believe we might know each other in a way none of us imagines." He paused, realizing the moment of truth had arrived. "Donna Maria, could you tell me about your mother, Isabella Whitmore?" Maria's reaction was immediate and dramatic. She stopped completely, her hand gripping the cane so tightly that her knuckles turned white. "How do you know that name?" she whispered, looking at Marcus as if he were a ghost from the past. "Because," said Marcus softly, "Isabella Whitmore was my great-aunt, and you are my family." The world around them seemed to go silent. Elena looked alternately at Marcus and her mother, trying to process what she had just heard. Maria leaned heavily on her cane, her eyes filling with tears that contained decades of unanswered questions. "That's not possible," Maria murmured. "My mother always said the family had abandoned her completely, that they had so much money they didn't even remember her existence anymore." "They remembered," said Marcus, his voice heavy with sadness. "And that's part of the tragedy. They remembered but chose to keep you away out of pride and social prejudice." Elena finally found her voice. "Marcus, who are you really?" "My name is Marcus Whitmore. I'm CEO of Whitmore Industries, one of the largest real estate companies in the country. And you," he looked at both women, "are my cousins. Family that should have been cared for and loved, but was cruelly rejected by a previous generation that valued social appearances above family bonds." Maria began to cry silently, decades of pain and confusion finally finding an explanation. "My mother died believing she wasn't good enough for her own family," she said between sobs. "She worked until the end of her life, always wondering what she had done so terrible to deserve being cut from her own lineage." Eleanor, still processing the revelation, looked at the ring on her finger with completely new understanding. "So this ring really belongs to a rich family." "It belongs to you," said Marcus firmly. "It's yours by right, as is much more that was denied to your family for generations." He paused, carefully choosing his next words. "But Elena, I need to confess something more. I didn't come to the restaurant by chance. I was testing people, looking for someone genuinely good in a world that had begun to seem filled only with self-interest." Eleanor looked at him with a hurt expression. "So I was just an experiment to you?" "In the beginning, yes," Marcus admitted honestly. "But Eleanor, you passed all the tests not because you were trying to impress someone, but because you genuinely are the extraordinary person you appear to be. And ironically, the most authentically good person I've found in years happens to be my own family." Maria wiped her eyes with a worn handkerchief. "My mother always said there are reasons for things to happen when they happen. Maybe it's time for some truths to come to light." Oh, in the following days, Marcus completely immersed himself in the task of reconstructing Elena's family's lost history. He hired professional genealogists, private investigators, and lawyers specialized in succession law. What he discovered was even more shocking than his initial research had revealed. Isabella Whitmore had not simply been disinherited. She had been the victim of a systematic campaign to erase her existence from family history. Documents were altered, records were sealed, and social connections were used to make every aspect of her and her husband's life difficult. The man for whom she had sacrificed her inheritance had died young, in an accident that Marcus's investigators discovered had suspicious circumstances, brakes that failed in a car that had recently been inspected by mechanics connected to the Whitmore family. Isabella had raised her daughter Maria alone, working domestic jobs for families who never knew they were employing a legitimate heiress to one of the country's oldest fortunes. She had died at 52, exhausted by decades of hard work and financial struggle, taking to her grave the bitterness of having been rejected for choosing love over money. Maria had grown up knowing only fragments of the story, that her mother came from a rich family that had rejected her, but never the complete details of the systematic cruelty that had been inflicted. She had married young, worked her entire life in manual jobs, and raised Elena with the determination that her daughter would have better opportunities, even if it meant enormous personal sacrifices. Elena, in turn, had absorbed the values of hard work and compassion from her mother and grandmother, without ever knowing she carried the blood of a lineage that had built an empire through generations. Her natural goodness wasn't just individual character, it was the continuation of a family tradition of moral strength that had survived decades of adversity and rejection. As the truth unfolded, Marcus also discovered something about himself that surprised him. His search for authenticity in other people had been, in part, a projection of his own dissatisfaction with the man he had become. Surrounded by wealth and power, he had lost touch with the fundamental values his own father had tried to teach him. Watching Elena, he wasn't just testing her character, he was rediscovering his own. The decision of what to do with these discoveries wasn't simple. Marcus could simply transfer a substantial amount of money to Elena and her mother, compensating them financially for the historical injustice. But the more he got to know his cousin, the more he realized this approach would be inadequate. Elena wasn't someone who could be bought or consoled with money. She needed to understand her legitimate place in the family and have the opportunity to choose how she wanted to proceed. So Marcus planned a careful and gradual revelation. First, he introduced Elena and Maria to other members of the Whitmore family, cousins and uncles who, he discovered, weren't all aware of the full extent of the injustice committed against Isabella. Many were genuinely shocked to discover they had relatives living in financial difficulties while the family enjoyed abundant wealth. The extended family's reaction was revealing. Some older members tried to justify past actions, arguing that those were different times and that the family reputation needed to be protected. Others, especially younger members, were indignant about Isabella's treatment and eager to correct historical errors. Elena navigated these family meetings with the same grace she demonstrated at the restaurant. She listened patiently to uncomfortable explanations from relatives trying to rationalize the past, responded with dignity to sometimes insensitive questions about her upbringing and circumstances, and maintained her composure even when confronted with the reality of decades of unnecessary deprivation. It was during one of these meetings that Eleanor's true character shone most intensely. One of Marcus's uncles, clearly uncomfortable with the financial implications of the discovery, suggested that perhaps it would be better to leave the past in the past and offer only a symbolic gesture of reconciliation. Elena looked him directly in the eyes and said calmly, "Uncle Robert, I'm not here for money. I'm here because my grandmother died believing she wasn't good enough for her own family. If you want to make peace with the past, do it by honoring her memory and ensuring that other people aren't judged by circumstances beyond their control." The response silenced the room and made Marcus feel deep pride for his newly discovered cousin. Elena had articulated in few phrases both the fundamental injustice of what had happened and the path to true reconciliation. But there was still another significant obstacle to overcome. Dr. Harrison Blackston, the executor of the Whitmore estate and the family's lawyer for over 30 years, was determinedly opposed to any formal recognition of Elena and Maria as legitimate heirs. Blackston argued that accepting their claims could set dangerous precedents and potentially attract other pretenders to the family fortune. Marcus quickly realized that Blackston had his own motivations for maintaining the status quo. As executor, he received a substantial percentage of the family investment returns. Recognizing new heirs would mean diluting his own compensation and potentially questioning other financial decisions he had made over the years. Deeper investigation revealed that Blackstone had been systematically inflating his fees, approving questionable investments that benefited his own companies, and even concealing documents that could have led to earlier discovery of the injustice committed against Isabella. He wasn't just an obstacle to family reconciliation. He was a financial predator who had been exploiting the family's trust for decades. Marcus decided it was time for a complete cleanup. He hired independent auditors to examine all family investments under Blackstone's management, genealogists to definitively establish Elena and Maria's inheritance rights, and lawyers specialized in asset recovery to track funds that might have been diverted. What they discovered was shocking. Blackstone had diverted more than $20 million over 2 decades through a complex network of fraudulent investments, inflated fees, and contracts with companies he secretly controlled. Worse still, he had used privileged information about the family business to make personal investments that competed directly with the Whitmore family's interests. Confronted with irrefutable evidence of his corruption, Blackstone initially tried to deny everything, then offered partial restitution in exchange for discretion, and finally threatened to expose family secrets if prosecuted. Marcus realized he was dealing not just with a thief, but with a blackmailer who'd been maintaining control over the family through veiled threats for years. It was Elena who suggested the approach that finally resolved the situation. "Marcus," she said after a particularly tense meeting with the lawyers, "this man prospered because no one ever held him fully accountable for his actions. He counts on the fact that wealthy people prefer to solve problems discreetly rather than face public scrutiny." "What are you suggesting?" asked Marcus. "Complete transparency," Elena replied without hesitation. "Criminal prosecution, public audit of family funds, and a promise that any money recovered will be used not only to compensate our family, but to establish a foundation that helps other people who have been victims of similar injustices." Elena's suggestion transformed a personal crisis situation into an opportunity for broader social impact. Marcus realized his cousin had proposed not just justice, but a way to ensure that his family's suffering could prevent similar suffering for others. The legal process against Blackstone was swift and devastating. Confronted with irrefutable financial evidence and the prospect of decades in prison, he agreed to fully restitute all diverted funds, transfer all assets he had acquired illegally, and cooperate completely with auditors to identify other irregularities. More importantly, the investigation revealed documents that Blackstone had hidden, correspondence showing that Isabella had attempted multiple times to establish contact with the Whitmore family over the years, especially when her health began to fail. All these attempts had been intercepted by Blackstone and never came to the knowledge of other family members. The discovery of these letters was devastating for Marcus. A letter from 1978 showed Isabella begging for reconciliation, not for herself, but so her daughter Maria could know her family heritage. Another, from 1983, was a desperate plea for medical help. Isabella had cancer and lacked resources for adequate treatment. A third, from 1984, was simply a notification that she had died, sent in the hope that someone in the family could at least know she had tried to maintain connection until the end. Blackstone had intercepted and filed all these letters, keeping Isabella and her family in isolation, while simultaneously keeping the rest of the family in ignorance about their situation. His corruption had not been just financial. It had been profoundly human, depriving people of family connections that could have changed the course of multiple lives. When Eleanor read these letters for the first time, she cried for a grandmother she had known only through fragmentary stories, but whom she now saw as a woman who had fought until the end to maintain bonds with her original family. "She never stopped loving us," Elena whispered, holding a letter where Isabella described her hopes that her daughter and possible granddaughters could one day meet their cousins and heritage. The financial restitution was substantial, more than $30 million when interest and penalties were included. But for Elena and Maria, the real value was in Isabella's vindication, in the proof that she had been a victim of circumstances beyond her control and not a person who had simply chosen poorly. With the funds recovered and the truth finally revealed, Marcus faced the question of how to proceed with his newly reunited family. Elena had remained working at the restaurant throughout the entire legal process, insisting she wouldn't change her life until everything was resolved properly and honestly. Her determination to maintain normalcy and independence impressed everyone who knew her. "Elena," said Marcus in a particularly important conversation, "you have the right to an inheritance that will completely change your life and your mother's. But I've learned that you're not the type of person who can simply receive a check and be happy. You need purpose, a way to make a difference." Elena smiled with that warm genuineness that had captured Marcus's attention from the beginning. "You're right. The money is wonderful, and my mother deserves all the security and comfort we can give her, but I wouldn't be happy simply being rich. I need to do something that matters." Thus was born the Isabella Whitmore Foundation, an organization dedicated to helping people who had been victims of family injustices, social discrimination, or financial corruption. Elena became the executive director, applying the same compassion she had demonstrated at the restaurant on a much larger scale. The foundation not only offered financial assistance, but also legal services, psychological support, and educational programs for people in situations similar to what her family had faced. Marcus assumed the role of board president, but it was Elena who directed daily operations. Watching her work was a continuing education for him. She applied to each individual case the same careful attention she had shown restaurant customers, remembering personal details, following long-term progress, and treating each person not as a case number, but as a human being with inherent dignity. The foundation quickly gained national recognition. Stories of reunited families, corrected injustices, and transformed lives began attracting media attention. Eleanor, initially reluctant about public exposure, gradually accepted her role as spokesperson for people who had been marginalized or forgotten by systems that favored those with power and resources. One of the foundation's first major cases involved a situation strangely similar to Eleanor's own story. An elderly woman in Detroit had been cut from the family inheritance 60 years earlier for marrying someone of a different race. Her children and grandchildren had grown up in poverty, while white relatives enjoyed inherited wealth. Elena personally traveled to Detroit, worked with local lawyers to establish inheritance rights, and supervised a reconciliation that resulted in a $15 million restitution for the family. "Every story we hear is unique," Elena said in an interview with a national magazine, "but the themes are similar. People are punished for choosing love over convention, for challenging social expectations, or simply for being born in the wrong circumstances. Our task is to remember that human dignity doesn't depend on others' approval." Marcus, watching Elena speak with journalists, realized she had become not just an effective administrator, but a moral leader. Her personal experiences with financial struggle, combined with her recent education about privilege and power, gave her a unique perspective on social justice. She could relate to both people in need and wealthy donors, serving as a bridge between worlds that rarely connected meaningfully. Marcus's transformation was also profound. Working alongside Elena at the foundation, he rediscovered a sense of purpose he had lost in years of wealth accumulation for its own sake. His real estate business began including affordable housing projects, community development programs, and initiatives that prioritized social impact alongside financial profit. Elena taught me that real wealth isn't measured in dollars, Marcus reflected during a foundation board meeting. It's measured in lives positively touched, in corrected injustices, in opportunities created for people who previously had no hope. The relationship between Marcus and Elena evolved from cousin discoverer to genuine family and professional partnership. Elena occasionally joked that Marcus had started testing her character, but that she had ended up testing his, challenging him to use his wealth and power in ways that truly mattered. Maria, Elena's mother, became a beloved figure at the foundation, working as an informal counselor for other mothers who had struggled to raise children in difficult circumstances. Her perspective as someone who had navigated decades of financial hardship while maintaining solid values was invaluable for families in similar situations. "My mother used to say that God works in mysterious ways," Maria said during the family's first Thanksgiving dinner together. She never could have imagined that being cut from the family would end up creating something bigger and more meaningful than any traditional inheritance. Isabella's ring, which had initiated the entire discovery, was transformed into the foundation's official symbol. Elena wore it during public events, not as an expensive piece of jewelry, but as a reminder that seemingly simple objects can carry profound stories and powerful connections. 2 years after the initial discovery, the Isabella Whitmore Foundation had helped more than 1,000 families, restituted more than $100 million in unjustly denied inheritances, and established legal precedents that facilitated future corrections of historical injustices. Elena had been recognized as one of the country's most influential young leaders, but remained essentially unchanged. Still kind, still focused on treating each person with dignity, still motivated by the fundamental belief that genuine goodness can transform the world. Marcus, in turn, had discovered that his initial search for authenticity in other people had actually been a search for authenticity in himself. Eleanor had not just passed his character tests, she had shown him what character really meant, and how it could be applied on a scale that mattered. The Corner of Hope restaurant, where everything began, became a regular meeting place for the extended family. Elena insisted on maintaining a permanently reserved table there, not just out of nostalgia, but as a constant reminder that transformative moments can happen in the simplest places, among people who initially seem to have nothing in common. During one of these family gatherings, Marcus reflected on the extraordinary journey that had begun with his cynicism about human motivations and evolved into a deeper understanding of human capacity for goodness, growth, and redemption. "Elena," he said, watching his cousin interact with waitresses who had been her work colleagues, "you saved more than our family. You saved my faith in humanity." Elena smiled, unconsciously touching the ring that had revealed so many secrets and created so many opportunities. "Marcus, I didn't save anything. We just reminded each other that genuine goodness was always there, waiting to be recognized and nurtured." The story of the waitress who dropped a ring and the millionaire who saw his family crest on it had become more than a tale about coincidence or destiny. It had become a demonstration that real justice requires not just recognizing past wrongs, but actively working to create a future where such injustices become impossible. Elena continued to be exactly who she had always been, a genuinely good person who treated others with compassion regardless of circumstances. The difference was that now she had resources to amplify that goodness on a national scale. Her wealth hadn't changed her character. It had simply given her bigger tools to express values she had always possessed. Marcus, on the other hand, had been fundamentally transformed by the experience. From a rich but spiritually empty man, he had evolved into someone who understood that true success is measured by positive impact on others' lives. His wealth hadn't lost meaning, but had gained purpose. The Isabella Whitmore Foundation continued growing, but Elena insisted on maintaining personal connection with each case. She still remembered names, still followed families' long-term progress, still treated each person as if they were the most important in the world. These traits that Marcus had initially noticed at the restaurant had become the trademark of an organization that was changing lives on a national scale. The story became legend in philanthropic circles, but for Elena and Marcus, it was simply the natural continuation of values their families had always possessed in their best versions. Isabella Whitmore had been punished for choosing love over social convention, but her memory had finally been vindicated through the creation of something that helped other people facing similar injustices. In the end, the character test that Marcus had planned had revealed itself to be bidirectional. Elena had proven her genuine goodness, but had also challenged Marcus to prove his own. Both had emerged from the experience as better people, and their reunited family had become a force for good in the world in ways neither could have imagined when a simple ring slipped from the tired fingers of a hard-working waitress. The lasting lesson of their story was that genuine goodness, when properly nurtured and supported, has the power to transform not just individual lives, but entire systems that perpetuate injustice. Elena had begun as a kind waitress in a modest restaurant. She had become a national leader in social justice. Marcus had begun as a cynical millionaire testing others' motivations. He had become a dedicated partner in building a more just world. Both had learned that true character isn't revealed in moments of artificial testing, but in the daily consistency of choosing compassion over convenience, justice over ease, and genuine human connection over personal advantage. And both had discovered that real family isn't defined just by blood or inherited wealth, but by shared values and mutual commitment to making a positive difference in the world. The Foundation's work expanded internationally, helping families across different countries who had faced similar systematic exclusion from their rightful inheritances. Elena's approach, combining financial restitution with emotional healing and systemic change, became a model studied by social justice organizations worldwide. Years later, when Elena was invited to speak at Harvard Business School about ethical leadership, she often began her lectures by showing Isabella's ring to the audience. "This simple piece of jewelry," she would say, "reminds us that every person carries a story, every family has hidden chapters, and every act of kindness, no matter how small, has the potential to change everything." Marcus, now in his 50s, had found in the foundation work the meaning that had eluded him during his years of pure wealth accumulation. He often said that Eleanor had taught him the difference between being successful and being significant. Success, he learned, was about personal achievement. Significance was about positive impact on others. The Corner of Hope restaurant, where their story began, eventually expanded into a small chain, with Elena and Marcus as silent partners, ensuring that each location maintained the same values of genuine hospitality and community service that had characterized the original. Every new location featured a small plaque telling Isabella's story and the Foundation's mission, turning each restaurant into both a business and a beacon of hope for those who had lost faith in justice. Elena never stopped being amazed by how a single moment, dropping a ring while serving coffee, had unraveled decades of hidden history and created opportunities for healing that extended far beyond her own family. She often reflected that if she had been less tired that day, if the ring had fit more snugly, if Marcus had been looking elsewhere at that crucial moment, thousands of families might never have received the help they desperately needed. But perhaps most remarkably, Elena maintained her fundamental character throughout the dramatic changes in her circumstances. Wealth and recognition hadn't corrupted her essential kindness or made her forget the struggles of ordinary people. She remained approachable, remembering the names of janitors and security guards, always having time for personal conversations with foundation clients, never losing the genuine interest in others' well-being that had first caught Marcus's attention. The Foundation's most ambitious project was the creation of a national database of historical family injustices, making it easier for other people in situations similar to Elena's to discover their true heritage and claim rightful inheritances. The database, freely accessible online, had already helped hundreds of families reconnect with lost branches and recover millions in wrongfully withheld assets. Elena's philosophy, developed through years of foundation work, was simple but powerful. Every person deserves to know their complete story, and every family has an obligation to heal old wounds rather than perpetuate them. This principle guided every decision the Foundation made, from individual casework to policy advocacy at the national level. Marcus often marveled at the exponential impact of Elena's original kindness to a stranger in a restaurant. That simple act of human decency had not only revealed their family connection, but had inspired the creation of an organization that had now helped thousands of people and influenced social justice policy across the country. It was a vivid demonstration of how individual character, when supported by adequate resources and institutional structure, could create change far beyond anything either of them had initially imagined. The story of the dropped ring had become more than a family legend. It had become a parable about the hidden connections that bind us all, the importance of treating every person with dignity regardless of their apparent circumstances, and the transformative power of combining genuine compassion with practical action. In a world often characterized by cynicism and division, Elena and Marcus had created something hopeful and healing, proving that it was still possible to build bridges between different worlds and create lasting positive change. Their legacy would be measured not just in dollars redistributed or families reunited, but in the fundamental reminder that authentic goodness still exists in the world, that justice is still possible even for old wounds, and that sometimes the most important discoveries happen in the most ordinary moments. When we're simply treating other human beings with the kindness and respect they deserve.